Some players did everything right. They dominated their positions, won major awards, delivered in big games, and led from the front. But somehow, they're still not in the NRL Hall of Fame. Today we look at the players who met the standard on paper, on the field, and over time, but still aren't in. No bias, no hype, and no bullshit. Just facts that make you wonder why they're still waiting. Welcome to HarbourNRL. Let's kick off. And let's start off with Greg Alexander. We all know Brandy for his commentary on today's game, but most people won't know just how good his career was in the NRL. Picture the 1991 Grand Final and young Captain Brandy embraces his teammates as the Panthers celebrate their first ever premiership. Alexander had just guided a once struggling club to the mountaintop, and it felt like the start of something special. In the late 80s and early 90s, Brandy was the man at Penrith. A silky halfback-fullback combo, equally capable of drilling a 40-meter field goal or carving a defensive line. In fact, he was so good early on that he won the 1985 Dally M Player of the Year at just 20 years old, announcing himself as one of the most naturally gifted players of his generation. And the thing is, Brandy's stats speak volume. 228 games for Penrith plus a stint for the Wars, 101 tries for the Panthers, and representative honours that include 6 Origin appearances for New South Wales. But he wasn't just a stat patter, he was also delivering in the big moments. In 1990, he led Penrith to their first grand final, falling just short of it all. So he made sure they went one better in 91, captaining his Panthers to glory. If you needed a clutch play, Brandy provided it, whether it was a sideline conversion under pressure or a risky chip and chase in the semis. So why isn't the Panthers' favourite son in the NRL Hall of Fame? His career had highs that rank with the all-time greats, but he didn't have the longevity or accumulating accolades of some others, maybe leading selectors to overlook him so far. And let's face it, the halfback role in his era was crowded even in New South Wales, with icons like Peter Sterling and Ricky Stewart, who are both already in the Hall of Fame. The point is, stiff competition. Yet Greg Alexander deserves that recognition. He was a catalyst that turned a struggling club into a champion. Teammates will tell you about his leadership, fans will tell you about the excitement he brought to every touch of the ball. He's already in the Panthers' own Hall of Fame, and even Penrith CEO Brian Fletcher has publicly questioned how Alexander isn't in the NRL's Hall. When you talk about players who had NRL Hall of Fame talent and impact, Brandy is right up there. But either way, he's not bad on the call, so I'll at least take that. Next up, we've got Paul Gallen, and whilst it still hasn't been that long since he retired, there's a strong case to make. If loyalty, leadership, and everything Queenslanders hate wore a jersey, it'd look exactly like Paul Gallen. Probably bruised and dripping with sweat, but grinning through it all. Gallen's defining image might be that night in October 2016. As the final siren sounded in the grand final, the Cronulla Sharks had finally won their maiden premiership. And there was Captain Gal, the tireless workhorse, tearfully embracing club legend Andrew Eddinghausen on the field. After 50 years of pain in the Shire, it was Gallen who lifted the Proven Summons trophy and exorcised decades of Sharks heartache. For that moment alone, you'd think Hall of Fame status awaits, but there's so much more to the story. Paul Gallen is Cronulla royalty, 348 NRL games for the Sharkies, the most of any Shark ever. Debuting in 2001, he spent 19 seasons with one club, which in today's standards is extremely unlikely, and along the way became known as the ultimate workhorse lock. He wasn't the flashiest player on the field, you wouldn't see behind the back passes or cheeky goosies, but if you wanted someone to make 50 tackles, carry the ball up when everyone else was gassed, and bleed for the jersey, Gallen was your man. And that's a player we all wish was on our team. He led by example week in, week out through good times and plenty of bad. Just by playing so long on some mediocre Sharks teams, he accumulated the most losses of any player in NRL history. Not exactly the exclamation point on it, a Hall of Fame career, let's be honest, but it only makes the 2016 payoff that much sweeter. Gallen's rep career is equally as good. He was the long-time New South Wales Origin captain during Queensland's dynasty, often practically carrying the Blues on his back, and when New South Wales finally snapped Queensland's 8-year Origin streak in 2014, guess who was the skipper? He also wore the green and gold with the utmost pride, 32 tests for Australia, and was a part of their 2013 World Cup triumph. So why is Paul Gallen not in the Hall yet? Some say his style wasn't flashy enough and and he was more admired for grit than highlights. Others point to controversy. Gallen was front and center in the Sharks supplement saga, copping a suspension that year, and that stain might have slowed or even completely stopped recognition on his career's greatness. He's also a polarizing figure for rival fans. All the cheeky punches and fights in Origin could be a reason, although I think we can all agree that's something we like to see from time to time. But if being an annoyance to opponents kept you out of the hall, then we don't really want to be in there anyway. Simply put, Gallen embodied everything you want in a Hall of Fame player. He was tough and absolutely integral to club and state success. He literally gave blood, sweat and tears for the game. Remember that this bloke once played on with a torn calf in Origin, refused to come off despite busted shoulders or broken noses. His crowning moment in 2016 wasn't just a personal victory, it was a rugby league fairy tale. The loyal one club veteran finally reaching the summit. The Hall of Fame should be about the story of the game, and Gallen's story is as good as it gets. Love or hate him. Next up, let's have a chat about Nathan Hindmarsh. And don't worry, there are some Queenslanders in this list too before people start calling it bias. If you could measure a player's greatness purely in heart and tackles, Nathan Hindmarsh would have been an immortal by now. For Para fans, Hindy is nothing short of a legend. A cult hero who left everything including his footy shorts on the field, made covered tackles he had no right to even be near, and who racked up more tackles than anyone had ever seen. Hindmarsh was the first player in NRL history to log 10,000 career tackles once stats were properly tracked. Again, that is 10,000 with 4 zeros. His engine was never ending, and at his peak he averaged over 40 tackles and 100 plus running meters per game consistently, playing a club record 330 games in the blue and gold. He became the epitome of a one club man and the heart of Parramatta through an era of near misses. How near miss are we talking here? Well, Hindy played in not one but 2 grand final losses in 2001 and 2009, plus a couple of gut-wrenching preliminary final defeats. Despite being on some champion Eel squads, a premiership medal eluded him, which is why fans often call him one of the greatest players to never win a grand final, which was actually backed up by a poll on NRL.com when fans were asked. Nathan Hindmarsh won the poll, which ultimately says a lot about how he was remembered. But don't think for a second that lack of a title diminishes his career. Hindmarsh's individual accolades are top tier. 5-time Dally M second rower of the year, which means that he was the best player at his position for the better half of a decade. He also won the Proven Summons Medal, which is the fan-given award for who they feel embodies the spirit of the game. A whopping 5 times, which again is the most in NRL history. On the rep scene, he was a regular for New South Wales with 17 Origin appearances and wore the Aussie jersey in 23 tests, mostly as a starter in aura farming kangaroo teams. The image every league fan has of Hindy is his jersey smashed in mud, hands on hips, dad bod on full display, sucking in a deep breath before charging off for yet another tackle, and then flashing with a grin in the post-match review. He was just that kind of player. All gas, zero ego, and a down-to-earth character to boot. So why isn't he in the Hall of Fame already? It likely comes down to the lack of a premiership and maybe being in the shadow of flashier back rowers of his era. He played alongside guys like Gordon Tallis and Bradley Clyde who have premierships, immortal talk, and maybe got the nod from judges earlier. Plus, Hindy's game was not about the highlight reels. It was about consistency and effort, attributes that sometimes don't get instant recognition. But make no mistake, Nathan Hindmarsh absolutely deserves Hall of Fame status. His impact on the game was immense in ways that go beyond stats, as does everybody on the list. He was the forward who never quit, never took a shortcut, the kind of player teammates love and opponents respect. So even if his trophy cabinet is missing that one big trophy, his career itself was pure gold. Now, our next player on the list comes with a short story from personal experience. My best mate in high school's dad was the groundskeeper at ANZ Stadium, which meant we got free games and access to the field as long as there wasn't a game on in the next few days. So one day we're just chilling in the front row of a completely empty ANZ Stadium when a guy came nonchalantly running out of the tunnel to slot some kicks from the sideline. My mate and I watched this dude kick about 20 shots back to back, all right down the middle, and he asked us if we wanted to personally simply help him out. You know, get the balls for him, kick them back to him so he can slot more shots. So for the next half an hour or so, my best mate and I were the personal ball boys for none other than Hazem El Masri. He even gave us some pointers that he uses when goal kicking, and that moment has, honest to God, stuck with me forever. Now, Hazem doesn't really need an introduction, and you didn't need to be a doggy supporter to appreciate the magic. If your team gave away a penalty anywhere in your half, you knew exactly what was coming. Hazem lining up the kick, crowd holding its breath, and then boom. 2 more points on the board, flags are in the air. For over a decade, Hazem was the deadliest sharpshooter in the NRL, a point-scoring machine who literally rewrote the record books. By the time he hung up the boots in 2009, Hazem had 2,418 career points, consisting of 159 tries and 891 goals in 317 games, which stood as the highest tally in premiership history at the time. Even today, he's second only to Cameron Smith on the all-time points list. And Cameron Smith needed 113 more games to do it. But focusing only on the numbers would be a disservice to Hazem's story. This was a boy from Lebanon who took up footy in Western Sydney and became a hero to an entire community. Early in his career, he was far from a guaranteed starter. The Bulldogs actually had Daryl Halligan, who was another legendary kicker, so El Masri bided his time on the wing. Once he got his chance though, El Masri captivated the NRL. He wasn't the biggest or fastest winger, but his game IQ and skills were top tier. He had a knack for being in the right place to finish off a backline movement, and if you gave him an inch on the sideline, he'd tiptoe and dive to score in the corner. And then of course he would nail the kick from the touchline. I can't even recall how many times we saw him do that. Hazem's trophy case does include the big one. He was a crucial part of the 2004 Bulldogs premiership team, scoring a try and kicking goals in the grand final. That year he also set a record for points in a season with 342 points and was the NRL's top point scorer for a 3rd straight year. He earned Dally M Winger of the Year honours and finally got a deserved New South Wales Origin call-up in 2007, where, true to form, he kicked clutch sideline conversions to help New South Wales win a game. Just not the frickin' series. Yet despite being in lethal form for so long, rep selectors often snubbed him. On the field though, teammates and opponents alike respected him as one of the most reliable players ever. So why might Hall of Fame selectors be slow on El Masri? Perhaps because he was just a winger in an era where Hall of Fame tends to favor halves and forwards. Maybe because he wasn't a highlight reel human joystick like some other backs. His game was efficiency and precision rather than big sidesteps or fend-offs. And sure, whilst most of his points came from kicking, which some might undervalue, Hazem changed the game with that kicking. Just ask Knight fans about round 20 2002, when Hazem nailed a sideline conversion in the dying seconds to steal a 1-point win. If that ain't legendary, I don't know what is. Bulldog supporters will still wear jerseys with his name and recall his farewell game in 09 when 40,000 people showed up chanting his name. El Masri made rugby league better, one kick at a time. And it's time for the Hall of Fame to wave him through the uprights. The sun is also smashing me in the face, so it's whatever, who cares. Next up is Paul Sirin. To a generation of fans, the name Paul Sirin evokes one image: a giant of a man in a black and orange Balmain Tigers jersey. In the late 80s, Sirin was the prototype of the modern rugby league forward, 6'4" and over 110 kilos of raw power, yet with a surprising turn of foot and an offload game. He was the enforcer with skill, the big bloke with soft hands, and man did he have a knack for the big stage. Case in point, the 1989 Grand Final. Often called the greatest Grand Final of all time, Sirin scored a big try in that game, barging over to give the Tigers a lead. And throughout the match, he was everywhere, hitting like a truck on defense and pushing ahead on nearly every carry. Sirin's resume cannot be ignored. He played 246 first grade games for Balmain from 1985 to 1998, sticking loyal with the Tigers through the good times and the bad years as the Winfield Cup era gave way to the NRL. Along the way, he represented New South Wales 14 times in State of Origin and put on the Australian jersey in 21 tests. Put it like this, he was a Kangaroos mainstay in the early freaking 90s, which was a period when Australia's forward pack was brimming with literal legends. Sirin went on 2 Kangaroo tours in 1990 and 1994 and was part of series wins over New Zealand and Great Britain. Domestically, he helped Balmain reach back-to-back grand finals in 88 and 89, forming a legendary pack with fellow greats like Wayne Pearce, Blocker, and Benny Elias, all of whom have since made the NRL Hall of Fame. Sirin, though, is still waiting. It could be because Balmain fell short of premiership glory in his heyday and Sirin doesn't get the shine that a title might have given him. Those Tigers had agonizing near misses, and maybe because the Hall of Fame selectors initially ticked off other players from the famous Balmain pack, they've unintentionally left Sirin behind. But it's certainly not due to lack of impact. If you ask anyone who saw him play, Sirin was one of the most feared forwards of his era. Despite his intimidating size, he was known as a gentle giant off the field, a humble bloke who just loved playing footy. On the field though, it's an obvious different story. And when he got into open space with the ball, good luck, because not many players could really just bring him down solo. He's a Tigers Hall of Famer and has stayed involved with the club long after retirement. Fans still talk about what if Balmain had hung on in '89. Ciro would likely have a Clive Churchill medal and a premiership ring, and perhaps might already be in the Hall of Fame. He consistently stood out in Origin, and he earned the respect of every opponent he faced. Hall of Fame voters need to remember that dominance isn't always measured in trophies, but sometimes measured in presence. And whenever Sirin was on the field, his presence was undeniable. Next up, let's have a suss of Kevy Walters. Now, straight out the gate, how do you leave out a bloke that was a big part of 6 premierships? Kevin Walters isn't just a Hall of Fame worthy player, he's rugby league royalty in Brisbane, one of the famed Broncos old guard who turned the club into a 90s powerhouse. Kevy won a title with Canberra in 1989 as a young super sub, and then 5 premierships with the Broncos in 92, 93, 97 in the Super League, 98 and 2000. Only a handful of players in history have as many premierships to their name. Walters was the common denominator in all those Broncos campaigns, the savvy 5'8" who partnered Alan Langer in the halves and made Brisbane's attack hum. But Kevin Walters' greatness isn't just about being on great teams as much as he made those teams great. He was often the unsung hero, playing second fiddle to more flamboyant teammates like Langer, yet always delivering the clutch plays when it mattered. Take the 2000 Grand Final. With Langer temporarily retired, Kevy captained the Broncos at halfback, guiding a new generation to a title and even setting up a try in the decider. Or take State of Origin 1998, Game 1. Queensland down late and Walters puts in a cheeky chip that leads to a miracle try, snatching victory in the process. But what makes that moment even more profound is the context. It came just 3 months after Kevin's wife, Kim, tragically passed away from cancer. You can only imagine the emotional weight he would have been carrying going into that game. Walters famously said he had hope from above on that play, and if you watch the footage back, you might get chills knowing what he'd been through. It was a fairy tale finish inspired by unimaginable heartache, and Kevy delivered under pressure that most of us can't even fathom. Walters' playing career spanned the late 80s to early 2000s, and he had impressive credentials. 20 Origin games including multiple series wins and a stint as captain in 1999, as well as a handful of test caps for Australia. Statistically, he might not have the best numbers, but his value was in his leadership and playmaking. He could read the game better than almost anyone. Need a momentum shifting play? Kevy would produce it. Need composure in the final minutes? He was as cool as the other side of the pillow. Wayne Bennett, who coached him at the time, often praised Walters as a key on-field tactician. So why hasn't Kevy been inducted yet? To be honest with you, I don't know. Perhaps overshadowing is a factor. Playing alongside Alan Langer, who is an immortal nominee for instance, can cause people to forget the other guy. Could also be his relatively short test career because Australia had Daly and Fittler as 5/8 options, making his name less automatic than some. And since retirement, as we should all know, Walters has been in coaching and most recently in commentating, which like Brandy might shift focus from his playing days a bit, but none of that should diminish what he accomplished on the field. 6 premierships, and that alone is Hall of Fame territory. Next up, we got Wendell Sailor, Big Dell. Just saying the name brings a smile to the fans of the NRL. Wendell Sailor wasn't just a player, he was a showman. A towering winger who combined power, speed, and a whole lot of personality. At 6'3", 100 plus kilos, Sailor could steamroll you like a forward, yet sprint down the sideline like a gazelle. He had the swagger, the post-try celebrations, the cheeky grin, and the charisma that made him a marketing dream. He was basically the NRL's Shaq. Thing is, he actually backed it up with performance. By the end of his NRL career, Wendell had scored 127 tries in 222 games, won multiple premierships, and become a household name even beyond rugby league. He is one of the few players to represent Australia in both league and union at the highest levels. Sailor's rugby league heyday was with the Brisbane Broncos, where he was a key part of their 97-98 premierships. In those seasons, Wendell was virtually unstoppable on the flank. The Broncos would simply shift the ball wide and let him bulldoze whichever winger was in front of him. And he topped the league's try-scoring charts, and on top of that was named Dally M Winger of the Year. But his peak individual year was 2001. Sailor ran in 18 tries through 19 games and then finished the season by leading Australia to victory in the World Cup. His test record is phenomenal. In 16 games for the Roos, he scored 13 tries, often in the biggest games, and then in State of Origin, he terrorized New South Wales with 13 tries in 14 games. Now just let that strike rate sink in for a minute. On the Origin stage, where tries are the hardest to earn, Big Del was essentially averaging a try a game. He also wasn't just an NRL fan favorite, he helped bring new fans to the game with his crossover appeal. People who knew nothing about the NRL would be like, oh, that's Wendell Sailor, right? When they saw him on TV. Culturally, as an Indigenous Australian athlete, he was a proud figure and has since spoken about how league gave him a platform and confidence. So what's keeping Wendell out of the Hall so far? Well, there are a couple of factors here. He left league in 2002 at the peak to play rugby union for 5 years. That meant he didn't compile as long of an NRL resume as some contemporaries. By the time he returned to league in 2008 with the Dragons, he was in his mid-30s and more a veteran presence, although he still gave us some flashes. 2, there's the big elephant in the room, his 2006 suspension for a positive drug test while in rugby union, but me personally, I couldn't care less. However, that 2-year ban blemished his reputation at the time and might give Hall selectors pause, as they tend to be sensitive pussies about off-field issues. Additionally, some might argue that Sailor's personality and code hopping overshadowed his week-to-week consistency. He wasn't always the most consistent performer early in his career, as he himself has admitted. But let's keep it real. The Hall of Fame is about what you did in the game, and Wendell Sailor's impact on rugby league was enormous. He was a 2-time premiership winner, a dominant Origin force, and a World Cup winner. He was also part of that early wave of players who proved that wingers could be as influential as any position on the field. Before guys like Wendell Sailor came along, wingers were often seen as just finishers, and Wendell changed that. He'd take hit-ups like a prop and inspire teammates with his energy. And let's not underestimate his entertainment factor. Rugby league is sport and entertainment, and nobody delivered as successfully as Wendell Sailor. Now, a bit of a throwback one here, but no NRL list is complete without mentioning some throwbacks. So let's go with Gavin Miller, and if you love an underdog story, Gavin Miller is your guy. Here's a player who in the early 80s bounced around, even went over to England for a stint before returning to Cronulla, and in his 30s playing the best footy of his life. And by best, I mean Dally M winner. Twice. Miller isn't a household name to younger fans, but ask anyone who watched the NSWRL in the late 80s and their eyes light up. As a crafty back rower, Miller didn't have the athletic gifts of some, but he had an extraordinary rugby league IQ and that traditional 80s toughness. In 88 and 89, he was the undisputed king of the league, winning back-to-back Dally M Player of the Year honors, guiding Cronulla to the top, and in 88, played a big part of the Sharkies' first ever minor premiership. Cronulla, a club that had never won a title at that point, finished first in the regular season with Miller as their man. He was basically their on-field general, and he was playing in a style that was ahead of his time. A ball-playing forward who could offload in traffic or throw a cutout pass to set up a try. And many credit him for paving the way for the modern ball-playing lock, kinda like how we see with Patrick Carrigan or Isaiah Yeo today. In England, he had already made a name too. He won the Man of Steel award in 1986, which is the UK's equivalent of the Dally M medal. So he literally proved himself to be the best player on 2 different continents. Now, stats-wise, Miller's overall career doesn't scream elite at first glance. He played 222 first-grade games over a long period, and not all of them were at peak level. He was a late bloomer. His prime was a short window from about 86 to 1990, but he did play rep footy. 5 State of Origin games for New South Wales and 2 tests for Australia. But again, those rep numbers don't tell the full tale. The point is, in his prime, he was as good as any other player in the world. And those who saw him live will recall the way he could turn a game with a cheeky offload or a clean short pass. Young Cronulla players basically learned by following his lead. So why is Gavin Miller not in the NRL Hall of Fame? Probably because his career, like we said at first glance, looks unusual. A few quiet years, a few speculative years, and then a slow fade out. He also never made a grand final or won a premiership, which often is a clincher for recognition. Cronulla in 88 and 89 fell short and Miller never got that big stage moment. Given that Cronulla now has a premiership and has started to get more historical shine, it's only right to put the spotlight on the guy who was their shining light in the late 80s. In sum, Gavin Miller might not boast the flashiest profile, but the insiders know how great he was. And I've never seen a player win both the Dally M twice and the Man of Steel award. If that is not Hall of Fame territory, then I don't know what is. And last up, give me Anthony Minichello. How quickly we forget the stars of yesterday when a new shiny star comes along. Case in point, Mini. Before James Tedesco and before Billy Slater fully blossomed, Minichello was the premier fullback in the game and a Chooks icon. He's also got a resume that screams Hall of Famer. 302 games, 139 tries, 6 grand final appearances, 2 premierships in 2002 and 2013, which is 2 grand finals over a decade apart, plus the highest individual honor in the sport, the Golden Boot Award in 2005 as the best player in the world. Not to mention he captained the Roosters to a title in the twilight of his career and won the Wally Lewis Medal in State of Origin. Yet, because his career overlapped with the rise of Slater, Minichello's name doesn't get thrown around as much as it should. So let's set the record straight. Minichello burst onto the scene in 2000 as a flashy winger, but it was when he moved to fullback that he truly found his calling. He was an integral part of the Roosters' early 2000s juggernaut team that made 4 grand finals from 2000 to 2004, and by 2005 he was the undisputed #1 fullback for New South Wales and Australia. His 2005 season was the stuff of legend. He dominated the Origin series, hence the Wally Lewis Medal for player of the series, and then played out of his skin in the Tri-Nations tour, which is where he was named the Golden Boot Player of the Year. That was a period where Minichello's kick returns, support play, and freakish ability under the high ball were second to none. He had this trademark kick return shimmy and acceleration that would regularly turn defense into attack. But then came the setbacks. From 2006 onwards, Minichello's career was ravaged by back injuries, which are always really serious. He had disc problems that required surgery and saw him miss the better part from 06 to 08. Lesser players would have faded away, but Mini, he reinvented himself. He modified his running style, focused even more on fitness and game awareness, making for a pretty solid return. By 2010, he had worked his way back into the Roosters squad and helped them to yet another grand final. And although they lost, he still played really well. But the crowning jewel was in 2013, as the veteran at 32 years of age captained the Rooster side full of young guns to the premiership. He wasn't just a ceremonial veteran captain either. He was still playing top-notch footy, organising the defense and chiming into the attack when needed. At the end of that year, he retired as the Roosters' all-time leading try scorer and games holder, with the records since being broken by Orbison and JWH, but for a time he did hold them. So now looking at this, you'd think Minichello is a shoo-in for the Hall. So far though, he hasn't been inducted. And why is that? Personally, I think it's just context and really bad timing. Slater emerged in 2003 and by 2008 had rightfully taken the mantle of best fullback. And by the time Mini retired, Slater was an immortal level figure, and folks sort of anointed Billy as the benchmark, sometimes forgetting how good Mini was in his own right. Also, those injury years took away some prime seasons. Who knows what Murray could have achieved in 06 and 07 if healthy, keeping in mind that he won the Best Player in the World award in 2005, so that 06 and 07 campaign would have been one to see. Hall of Fame selectors might also simply be taking things in chronological order. Minichello became eligible not too long ago, and we can assume he's on their radar. Teammates speak of his work ethic, how even after serious surgeries, he was the first at training, determined to get back. And in terms of fan memory value, he's huge. Ask any Rooster supporter about their favourite players, and Minichello is pretty often around there somewhere. Right up there with Freddie, who is already in the Hall of Fame. Mini's story is one of peak performance, adversity, and redemption. And that checks all the boxes of Hall of Fame storytelling. He's got the accolades too. You can never forget the Golden Boot, the premierships, and just straight up the long service. all of these players weren't just great. They met every mark that the Hall of Fame requires. Premierships, rep honors, major awards, leadership, and consistency. All players are proven and overdue. And if any of these players don't make the Hall one day, then we've got to take a second to really ask ourselves what the standard really is.